More Florida communities are pulling back from fluoride. We asked why. You're listening to The Wrap from Central Florida Public Media. I'm Brendan Byrne. Fluoridated water is a hot topic across Central Florida. More and more communities are voting to end the practice long considered by a majority of health officials to be safe and beneficial to children's dental health. However, more people are questioning the benefits and want to end the practice of public fluoridated water. Last week, the city of Melbourne voted to stop fluoridation and joined a growing list of Florida communities doing the same.
This raises a fundamental question about safety and informed consent. I, for one, do not consent to being a filter for an industrial byproduct labeled fluoride.
Why do we fluoridate, and why are communities voting to end it? That's ahead on The Wrap. The big stories this week from Central Florida Public Media. But first, these headlines. Immigration lawyers in Central Florida are experiencing a large spike in calls for help after President Trump's sweeping executive orders on immigration this week. As Central Florida Public Media's Rick Brunson reports, local attorneys are trying to cut through rumors and misinformation to help immigrant families clarify their legal status.
After President Trump's flurry of executive orders targeting refugee resettlement, asylum, and birthright citizenship, immigration attorneys in Central Florida are fielding lots of calls from people worried about their status and that of their children. Attorney Barbara Perez, who practices immigration law in Castleberry, is urging the concerned people calling her to make sure they consult with a licensed attorney who knows the law and can clarify their status.
There's a lot of nonprofit organizations currently that are beginning to host Know Your Rights presentations, and I would highly suggest people to attend those because you can get information about what your rights are and what you can expect if you were to come into contact with an immigration official.
The nonprofit organization Orlando Center for Justice reports a 20% increase in calls since Monday. Rick Brunson, Central Florida Public Media.
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention issued new guidance to hospitals advising them to test hospitalized flu patients within 24 hours to help identify new cases of bird flu. Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen tells us more.
So far, no bird flu cases have been identified in Florida residents, birds, or dairy animals. But the CDC issued guidance in an abundance of caution due to the death of a man in Louisiana diagnosed with bird flu, and also because emergency department visits regarding typical flu cases are increasing around the country. Advent Health said it's complying with the CDC guidance. Orlando Health declined to comment on the implementation of the new guidelines.
That was Joe Mario Pedersen reporting. Advent Health and Orlando Health are sponsors of Central Florida Public Media, but do not have any editorial control over our stories. The city of Ocala has terminated its $300,000 contract with its 4th of July drone operator, Sky Elements. It's the same drone company in charge of a show in Orlando that left a 7-year-old boy hospitalized last month. Following the accident, the Federal Aviation Administration suspended a waiver that lets the company put on its elaborate shows. City leaders unanimously voted to end the contract with no clear runway to the suspension's end and concern for citizens and cost. Ahead of the Ocala decision, Sky Elements sent a letter to the city with new safety procedures. A preliminary National Transportation Safety Board report reveals not all the drones in the Orlando show launched simultaneously, and the whole performance was off position by about 7 degrees, impacting virtual safety boundaries. Ocala city leaders have not decided on the 4th of July show replacement. These stories and more on our website. Visit cfpublic.org. Since the pandemic, schools across the country have been struggling with absenteeism. In Florida, one school district struggling with these absences says one part of the problem is that kids can't always get to school. The district thinks they found a solution: give kids bikes.
This is very intentional to address chronic absenteeism and ensure that we're able to remove those barriers.
That story on our website, cfpublic.org. Across Central Florida, more communities are voting to remove fluoride from the water supply. Last week, the city of Melbourne was the latest to opt out. According to the Florida Department of Health, currently 45% of Florida counties have public water systems that actively fluoridate. The practice began about 70 years to help prevent cavities. Central Florida Public Media health reporter Joe Mario Pedersen and environment reporter Molly Durg spoke with my colleague Talia Blake to walk us through why a topic that many in the scientific community and the general public deemed not debatable is once again up for questioning.
Molly, Joe Mario, thanks for joining us.
Hi there.
Hey, good to be here.
So it feels like the fluoride conversation is now really top of mind for a lot of communities. So why are we talking about this right now?
So, despite the fact that water fluoridation has been heralded by a majority in the scientific community, for some, this has actually never been settled. And now, with President Donald Trump's pick for Health and Human Services Secretary and Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is anti-fluoride, this conversation has once again taken off.
We should also mention the fact that Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo has issued new guidance discouraging local governments from fluoridating water. He's actually gone as far as to call it public health malpractice.
Whoa, that's a strong statement. So what are the concerns with fluoride?
Well, prolonged exposure to high concentrations of fluoride can lead to fluorosis, discoloration of teeth. There's also growing concern about potential cognitive impacts in children, things like ADHD and diminished impulse control, as well as reduced IQ.
And a federal judge out of California recently ruled that fluoride in drinking water poses an unreasonable risk of reduced IQ in children at the levels currently considered optimal for preventing tooth decay. But that judge also wrote his ruling doesn't conclude with certainty that fluoridated water is harmful to public health. So it definitely still leaves a lot of questions, particularly for the Environmental Protection Agency, which the judge ruled has to do something to address the risk with fluoride without specifying exactly what.
So how much fluoride are we actually adding to water? I mean, what are we talking about here?
The Department of Health and Human Services recommends a 0.7 parts per million concentration of fluoride for drinking water, which is what water utilities will typically add. Another way to think about that 0.7 parts per million, it's like a little less than 1 minute every 2 years.
But to be clear, fluoride is a naturally occurring mineral that can be found in groundwater, in soil, rivers, and lakes.
So where does that leave us today here in Central Florida?
Yeah, it leaves us with lots of communities debating this issue. So some local jurisdictions that were not adding fluoride to the drinking water supply previously are now doubling down on that choice not to do so. One city, Leesburg, recently voted to start adding fluoride to the water. Now some folks there are sounding the alarm about that. Justin Harvey lives in Maitland. He's a critic of fluoridating water and is helping rally Central Floridians around the cause.
And I'm just like, wow, we kind of are administering the public a medicine. And that's where we are today, is really working at knocking off community by community and telling them to take the now known neurotoxin out of the water supply.
So one of the latest examples is Melbourne in Brevard County. Joe Mario and I were actually there last week when a fluoride discussion at a city council meeting lasted until the wee hours of the morning.
I'm a dentist, a periodontist. I also have a background in research and academia. So I've personally seen the devastation that can occur from cavities in children and adults.
This raises a fundamental question about safety and informed consent. I, for one, do not consent to being a filter for an industrial byproduct labeled fluoride.
Since Melbourne provides drinking water to several other jurisdictions nearby, this decision will impact those places too.
So what is the state of Florida saying about these community changes?
So as we mentioned earlier, at the end of last year, Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo issued guidance against fluoridating water. And he was in Bartow earlier this month during a city council meeting talking about the issue. He brought with him Ashley Mallon, a researcher from the University of Florida. And Mallon says she led the first study on fluoride's impact on children and pregnant women that was based in the U.S. The population she studied was out of Los Angeles County, California.
We found that higher exposure to fluoride during pregnancy was associated with more neurobehavioral problems in the children by age 3.
Mellon's study found these children experienced symptoms consistent with autism spectrum disorder, emotion dysregulation, anxiety, stomach aches, and headaches.
That seems like that's a pretty big win for those who have been sounding the alarm on fluoride, right?
Well, it's consistent with what studies outside the U.S. have found. And to be clear, so far, most of those studies have been deemed low quality. But recently, a handful of high-quality studies did find that for children, fluoride exposure levels at or above 1.5 parts per million are consistently associated with lower IQ.
Also, a key point here. The federal judge who recently sided with fluoride critics agrees that the safety margin, or the difference between the exposure level and the hazard level for fluoride, is too small. So typically, in its risk assessment process for chemicals, the EPA starts off with a wider safety margin of 10 times the exposure level. But for fluoride, the hazard level is only about 2 times as high.
So where do we expect this fluoride conversation to go next?
Well, this recent fluoride ruling all stemmed from a citizens' petition filed under amendments that were made to the Toxic Substances Control Act in 2016. And it's the first citizens' petition since then to succeed in that it's now directing the EPA to take action on a chemical. So it's going to be really interesting to see what changes we might see to how the EPA regulates other chemicals of potential concern. Now, keep in mind, we still have yet to see what exactly the agency will do in response to the judge's ruling on fluoride.
But environmental lawyer James Ferrara Jr. says he's expecting to see more debates like this one unfold as we learn more about and start regulating the presence of PFAS, forever chemicals, in our water supply.
I mean, there's a whole host of other toxins out there that now hypothetically could look at this as precedent and say, hey, we're going to file a citizens petition in court and we're going to force the agency's hand.
So we'll just have to wait and see.
That we will. Joe Mario Molly, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, good to be here.
That's it for The Wrap this week. This podcast is produced by Central Florida Public Media with assistance from News Director LaToya Dennis and Digital Director Ryan Ellison. I'm Brendan Byrne. This is The Wrap.